Welcome everyone, Questini here with a discussion about some of the best beginner campaigns in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. But before I get into the list, I have two things to mention. One, what makes a good beginner campaign? Well, I think it is a campaign where you have a good amount of variety in the sense of the types of units you can recruit, the types of units that you can use, the types of heroes you can use by default without DLC enabled. Then, it's also a campaign where you're dealing with as many of the game systems as possible. And you might be forced to deal with those game systems as possible. I think a good beginner campaign is not a campaign where you have a linear path and you're always recruiting the same kind of units over and over and over again. It is variety, it is choice, it is the player being forced to make some of those choices, but not necessarily being thrown on the deep end either. There are certain campaigns that are really good, but I would certainly not recommend them for beginners. But the thing I would also mention for beginner players is when you start Warhammer 3, the one thing you should do is you should play the Lost God campaign. Whether or not you're someone who's played Total War before and just picking up Warhammer 3, or someone who's just getting started in Total War in general, this is a really good starting campaign. It's got a good narrative, it's got good gameplay for what it is as a tutorial campaign. It might hold your hand a bit too much to be certain, but it will teach you a lot of the basics of the game and also be a fairly solid adventure. I kind of wish they would do more campaigns like this, though actual campaigns, not just tutorial campaigns. But for a tutorial campaign, they really did a great job with the Lost God campaign, and hopefully they will do more campaigns like this. So with that said, let's get started with the list. At number 5, we have Tyrion of the High Elves. Now, to be sure, the High Elves have a significant number of issues, including a bunch of cheese tactics that you can use. That's why I have a bunch of Archmage Lords over here. But out of all the characters that Creative Assembly introduced in Warhammer 2, there are many that didn't make the transition from Warhammer 2 to Warhammer 3, especially the initial ones. Then there is Tyrion, one of the campaigns that's always been really good ever since it was introduced in Warhammer 2. He has a very good starting position if you're a beginner player with a really strong province and a bunch of possibilities in that province. He starts with a unit of cavalry, he starts with a flying unit, he starts with 2 hybrid units and a bunch of spearmen. And he also has a mage, and can get access to a noble, a melee hero, with replenishment fairly early on in his campaign. And that is actually a good amount of early game variety that you do have over here in this campaign, especially if you're a beginner player. The High Elf playstyle is also particularly well suited for beginner players, and Tyrion is the generic lord, if you will, for the High Elves. Really good campaign. Some interesting quest battles, very thematic quest battles as well, to be certain. A huge amount of combat power and one of the better skill lines available to a lord. Things like global recruitment duration -1 turn, global recruitment capacity, unifier, upkeep 10% to all armies. All of that is very, very solid. And combine that with a -50% upkeep benefit for Spearmen, Silver Guard, Rangers, Archers, and Silverhelm units, which are the units you want to use, especially in the early game. I think that this campaign is great. Then there is the objective of this campaign, which is to wipe out both Morathi and Malekith. Now, that objective can be considered straightforward, but how you go about doing that objective, that is a very, very different discussion. Because do you rush Morathi, or do you ignore Morathi and hope that the Stankia potentially is going to wipe her out, and then instead go for Malekith and try and take him out to achieve your short campaign victory conditions? I would not necessarily recommend this campaign in a lot of ways, just like I wouldn't recommend this campaign in a lot of ways for veteran players, or High Elves in general. I would not recommend that, but I think for a beginner player, this is a really, really good starting point. The reason I'm actually putting it lower on this list than what I think it deserves, there is a specific issue right now in the game. Hopefully Creative Assembly will fix it soon enough, but there are problems with range units. Lots problems. Problems that do genuinely ruin campaigns. To be certain, I've seen them more with gunpowder units and flamethrower units like the dwarves than I've seen it with elves, but just be aware of that drawback right now in the game that does exist. To be fair, ranged units have had significant issues for a very long time in Warhammer 3, but it's gotten to the point that a lot of people are actually realizing it and talking about it. So that's one of the downsides right now with this campaign. Hopefully it will be fixed by the end of the month. But even so, still really a good starting point. Once you finish playing the prologue campaign, this is the campaign I would probably start with if you're a new player. We have Emperor Karl Franz of the Empire, and one of the most played campaigns in Total War Warhammer 3. And for a reason. That reason is, of course, we're all humans, and humans are obviously going to be a popular race to play in any of these kind of fantasy games. But I do think Karl Franz has genuinely a good campaign, and a good campaign even for a beginner. It might feel like you're being thrown on the deep end with Khazrak, Festus, Grom, Kemmler, Vlad, etc. But that's actually the good part of this campaign, those kind of choices that you are forced to make. Which front do you deal with? Which minor Imperial faction, Electrocon faction do you help, and how do you help them? The electoral machinations mechanic is a really good campaign mechanic. In terms of armies, the Empire does have a great variety of armies between cavalry, range units, melee units. The melee side of things is not necessarily as strong as some other things, to be sure, but it does get the job done. In particular, great swords do get the job done. And ever since they put spearmen with shields as the tier 1 unit, things have looked up significantly better. But just a really good variety of units, a good variety of heroes. Even if you don't own any Empire DLC, this is a good choice. If you do own any Empire DLC, I'd probably recommend getting Thrones of Decay, Master Engineers, Null Ironsides, Huckland, Long Rifles, Landships. All really good stuff to get. I would not bother with the Beast and the Hunter. Grim the Grave can offer you some nice things, Arch-Electors, Knights of the Blazing Sun, etc. But to be certain, this is a campaign you do not need to own any DLC for in order to have a really good time and a good variety in your campaign. Lots of choices, lots of possibilities, lots of different playstyles. Good selection of quest battles that are available over here, free quest battles that you do have available in this campaign. So really a rock solid campaign. Funnily enough, I started covering Warhammer 3 fully as a content creator when Immortal Empires came out, and this was one of the recommended campaigns that Creative Assembly put for the game. I thought that was a joke, considering how bad Karl Franz was initially in Immortal Empires. But now, this is genuinely one of the better campaigns in the game, one of the best campaigns in the game. And unlike the High Elves, the Empire does work very well. You are still going to suffer from the range issue that does plague the game right now, because otherwise I might put this campaign higher on the list. But even so, you do have a great variety in this campaign, a lot of things you can use, a lot of things you can learn when you're playing this specific campaign. Good lore, good skill line, good mechanics. And what I really like about this campaign, I think this is useful, it makes you care about more than just your little corner of territory on the map. You care about the entire empire because, one, you have imperial authority with all the benefits and downsides that come with that. And two, you can guarantee confederation with all the Electrocounts, or actually all the Imperial factions in the game through unification. Unification with Electrocounts initially, then you have this little research over here that upgrades Emperor's Decree actions, which allows you to confederate all other Imperial factions in the game, regardless of where they are. So I think those are just great mechanics. The amount of choices that you do have over here through electoral machinations and the diplomacy choices is pretty good. Like, it's kind of hilarious. Karl Franz, the whole system of prestige, etc., was based on the High Elf mechanic of influence, but I think, like, right now the Empire is just a much better race than the High Elves in the game. Thorgrim, Grudge Bearer of the Dwarf. Certainly, there's a lot of range campaigns that I'm putting on this list. Though, that said, the Dwarves are not reliant on range units to get the job done. They're reliant on flying range units, which don't have the same issue. Get a bunch of gyrocopters, get gyrocopters with the brimstone gun, which is a freaking flamethrower. Get bombers, gyro bombers, and you start with one of those bombers. That is really awesome about the Dwarves. Then you have a good selection of faction effects and lord effects with regards to Forgrim, including, quite importantly, hero capacity, as well as increasing your Age of Reckoning Grudge Settler army to actually make it quite a significant threat for anyone to deal with. Like, if you get one of those armies, things are gonna really look up. Lots of quest spells available over here that do give you a variety of foes to deal with, lots of money, lots of resources, good items overall over there. So between the hero capacity, the fact that dwarves have really good melee units, they have flying ranged units, it just ends up being a great campaign from that perspective. I did recommend this campaign quite highly before, but I think the addition of Gorbad over here in Black Crag, just south of you, does spice things up quite a bit and makes this campaign better than where it was before. Because before, after the Throne's Decay was released, things could get pretty trivial in this campaign. Well, they're not going to get so trivial once you have to start dealing with Gorbad. And the higher the difficulty you're playing on, the crazier things get to with greenskins. Like, let me just put it like this. On Legendary, don't be surprised if, you know, you're one of those players like myself who just jumps on a very high difficulty in the game. That's what I personally do. Don't be surprised if Gorbad starts attacking you with 6, 7 full stacks fairly early on in a campaign. That is crazy, but it's awesome, because dwarves are awesome, and they can deal with that. They have the tools necessary to deal with that, and I think just the Badlands in general have been really upgraded in terms of an area where you can have a lot of fun and a huge amount of campaign variety, and that's what you're going to be dealing with over here. But it's not just the Badlands, you also have Skarsnik, you have the Darklands, you have Tretch. You do have a number of issues that you gotta deal with. To be certain, I think from a terrain perspective, the Badlands could be improved on significantly, but I think like just in terms of variety of factions that are dealing with the variety of foes, the addition of Ogre Mercenaries working properly, that does open up a whole lot of possibilities in this specific area of the campaign. So Forgrim's campaign, just really solid, good campaign that can be a great deal of fun and can teach you a great deal of things as well. Like, how do you build your economy? Do you focus on things like construction costs, or do you focus on getting oath gold? What do you go for research? What kind of army do you build? What kind of heroes do you get? How do you build properly varied armies? Just recommendation, don't go full on range right now, because it's just not really going to work especially well. Like, I'm seeing a lot of issues with Iron Drakes and Thunderers. Ruined my Grumbrindle campaign, I gotta tell you. But you do have a bunch of options, like a melee dwarf campaign. That works, believe it or not. It works really well if you're going full on Longbeards, Hammers, and like Forgrim has a bunch of benefits for that specific playstyle of Hammerers in particular. But Longbeards do also work quite well as well. And number 2, it would have to be Scrag, the Slaughter of the Ogre Kingdoms. I would recommend Maneater, but I think Maneater is a bit too safe of a campaign compared to Greasus and Scrag. And, well, Greasus is still a bit of a meme on that mobility scooter that he has. Meanwhile, Scrag is really powerful, really damn powerful. And the fun thing about the Ogres is you do have a sheer amount of variety in the terms of diplomacy. See, many other factions can either go one way or another with regards to their diplomacy, but the Ogres now can go whichever way they want, and that is freaking hilarious. You really do feel like a mercenary faction, regardless of which of the Ogre factions you decide to play as. I just think Greasus is a bit bullshit, Maneater is too safe, so that leaves Scrag. And I think Scrag is really awesome Legendary Lord. You fight battles, you get Gorgers, you get more meat, you get a bunch of faction effects, provided, of course, you enable all these offerings to the Great Maw, and this is freaking hilarious. Beyond that, Ogres really have a solid baseline unit roster. You do not need Omens of Destruction to have a great time with regards to the Ogre Kingdoms, because the baseline unit roster is very solid. Sure, you could benefit from some of the units that are part of Omens of Destruction, but I really think for Ogres, the paid part of Omens of Destruction that's worth it is actually just Maneater himself. Whereas the baseline Ogre Race Pack does offer you 2 really good campaigns, 2 very unique campaigns in their own way. Like, Maneater is all about teleportation and contracts, Greasus is all about being the god of gold, if you will. And Scrag is all about meat, heroes, magic. He is ridiculously good with regards to that. And also he's about Gorgers. Like Gorgers with Devastating Flanker in his own army. Pretty damn great. Pretty damn great situation. Or summonable Gorgers that last an infinite amount of time and you can get up to 4 of them in a battle. That is pretty crazy. Like, let me just put it like this. I think Scrag right now can make one of the most powerful armies in the game that doesn't rely on just getting a bunch of tier 5 stuff in it, or getting a bunch of or getting a bunch of or a lord with a bunch of really good traits, or heroes decked to the teeth in items. No, naked heroes with Scrag, butchers with replenishment and healing is just crazy good right now in battles. And the thing is, ogres do start with a fairly solid unit roster by default. Like ogre bulls with dual weapons are a really good early game unit, and then you get lead belchers, artillery, iron guts, cavalry. It is pretty good right now. I would not necessarily bother with the Gnoblars, but I do think that the ogre roster, the ogres themselves, offer a great variety of units, variety of choices that you do have available in a campaign. And because you have so much viability of diplomacy and you're near the Battlelands and the Empire, you have a great deal of choices in this campaign in a way that you might not necessarily think about initially when you're starting this campaign. So I think this is a campaign that just starts giving, and it takes a long time until you really fully understand exactly what you can do. There is a huge mountain of bullshit that Scrag can do, and it is awesome. And I think it's awesome for new players to really experience something like this. Just sheer variety of choices, diplomacy, units, economy, etc., heroes. Just a really good situation over here for Scrag the Slaughterer. Yes, ogres have gone from being one of the worst races in the game to being a really fun, to being one of the best races in the game to play at the moment. Regardless of your skill level, regardless of whether or not you're a veteran player or a new player. And finally, at number 1 is our Bal Undefeated. Now, this might seem like a bad fit for a beginner campaign, considering how easy it can be, but is it really that easy? I would say that this campaign is as difficult or as easy as you make it out to be. And I think that that is a great aspect of this particular campaign, because most campaigns, the difficulty is stagnant. Whereas in this campaign, you do actually get to choose how difficult or easy it's going to be, because you have things like honor before reason, or blood shall spell, which make your army less effective in combat, or buff the enemy. Then you have a great deal of variety in this campaign, far more so than many other campaigns, because you do have the teleportation over here that will allow you to traverse the world. That is already a great aspect in of itself, but it actually goes way, way, way beyond that, because it's not just about teleporting to a location that you can do in this campaign. It's also what you can do once you do teleport to a location. So for instance, over here, let's say, I go deal with the Stanky, I get a bunch of Corn's favor over here, I raise the settlement to the ground. Sure, I can get away with a lot of auto-resolving in this campaign. But what is interesting about this situation is, so I've teleported once this turn. Next turn I'll be able to teleport again, but in one of the battles I fought over here, one of the effects you can have is a chance of summoning a cult, or summons a cult after completing a challenge. Assuming it's not happening in a settlement and you're raising it to the ground. But regardless, you can then set up a cult. A cult allows you to teleport. It does cost cults to do so, but basically next turn, what Arbol is going to do, he's going to teleport over here near Tylea. I can then fight a battle over here near Tylea, obliterate the Tylians after I obliterated Aranessa, more or less, and then I can also teleport again through his unique mechanic. That is a great dynamic campaign in of itself. Just the sheer amount of choices over here that you have in terms of difficulty, what foes you're fighting. You do not need, by the way, to throw yourself against the highest level of challenge. You also have some real risk in this campaign. I think some of the best campaigns where people learn how to play is where there is a certain level of risk, but not a bullshit level of risk where there's 7 freaking stacks thrown against you. No, a manageable level of risk, or one that is a bit more reasonable, which, by the way, Warhammer, or Total War in general, have really sided on the side of unreasonable bullshit level of challenge, like constant rebellions, when I'm thinking like of Total War, Tilla, that kind of stuff. Not really a great campaign dynamic, I gotta say that. Here you do have that kind of choice, but it goes further than this. This campaign is available to everyone. You might not have the entire unit roster or the entire hero roster or lord roster without DLC, but Khorne is very playable even with the baseline roster. You will benefit from having Champions of Chaos, you will benefit from having Omens of Destruction, but do you need them to have a pretty solid time? I wouldn't necessarily say so, though I think they do add quite a bit, especially in terms of the kind of units you can get, like Chaos Knights of Khorne with Lances are pretty damn fun units to use. And yes, that does require you to own the Champions of Chaos DLC. Though again, you have plenty of units that are available to Khorne by default. You can get Chaos Warriors of Khorne, you can get Chaos Warriors of Khorne with dual weapons. At tier 3, you can get Blood Reapers, Cultists. It's just the DLC does add extra stuff on top of that, and I would firmly recommend having that, but a lot of the really fun stuff, like Minotaurs, are available to everyone. And the great thing about Arbol is that even though he's teleporting around and moving around the campaign map a lot, he has one of the best global recruitments in the game. The reason behind that is that he gets a global recruitment duration turn of -1 for all units for his army. But you also then have Bloodletting, which reduces that global recruitment duration if you get it to max. So you're fighting battles, and you end up reducing global recruitment duration of -2. So what that really means is that in this campaign, the vast number of units, or all units, or vast majority of units, there are some units that may take 2 turns, but the vast majority of units can be recruited in 1 turn. That and it's for Arbol's army. It's obviously not going to work in the same way for other armies, to be certain on that subject, but it does work for Arbol himself. And here's the kicker. You can always teleport to a location on the map, and you don't just have to raise settlements. You can conquer stuff. You can recruit, you can show up with a full stack in a settlement, take that settlement, no problem, get another lord over there, transfer units from Arbol, like units you already have, transfer some of the units, and then just recruit a bunch of them in a single turn. Then teleport next turn, rinse and repeat. That gives you an enormous level of variety in a campaign. But it goes further than this. You also have a good amount of diplomatic capabilities over here, because you have a lot of capability for diplomatic vassalization. That is really fun to engage in. I feel like subjugation in the way Warriors of Chaos have it is not necessarily the best system. I think diplomatic vassalization does tend to work overall better. It does impose some limitations, whereas subjugation is just a bit too ridiculous. I think, like, just in general, some of those things. I can understand why CA designed it like that. I guess the developers of Champions of Chaos were not necessarily, or the people who introduced subjugation were not necessarily confident that the diplomacy changes. Like, sometimes it just feels like there's different parts of CA that are working on different things, and they're not necessarily cooperating as well together or testing things as well as they should. So that's how you get the vastly improved diplomacy system, region training, and also diplomatic subjugation added with Slaanesh when Realms of Chaos came out, because it's based on that, essentially. But regardless, you do have a great variety in this campaign. You have the entire map available to you, and I think this is one of the reasons I would recommend it for beginners, because you have a really powerful army, you have a great selection of climate variety in the game, or decent enough climate, not as much as climate matters, though you do have Wasteland, Frozen, Mountain, and Chaos Wasteland. That is a lot of the map. Like, honestly, as long as you don't have anything uninhabitable except ocean and magical forests, you're pretty good. Because there's only one region with ocean, and magical forests are fairly rare. So it's a very good situation that Arbol has to deal with. And I think this campaign is great for beginners because you will see the world. You will get to deal with different foes. You do have a very powerful army, but I think it's a great learning tool on how to fight Vlad, how to fight Archaon, potentially, because yes, you can fight Archaon, how to fight Grimgor, Tamarkon, etc. You have these objectives. Now, I do think they do need to rebalance some of the armies that you do get over here, because you can get a bunch of, like, rogue armies, and I think you should never get rogue armies, unless there's literally no more factions to fight. So I'm not particularly fond of that. In a campaign, I think, like, you should get more Legendary Lords to teleport to, but even though you might have a rogue army to deal with, you're probably going to be pretty close to Legendary Lord. Why not go fight that? Learn some things. How I deal with various armies, different scenarios, different maps. That is what makes this campaign so great. It's like putting you out there in a single campaign. You might experience more terrain variety than you might experience dozens of campaigns elsewhere. Yes, it might be really powerful. I understand that. But sometimes just how powerful a campaign is not necessarily the be-all and end-all. It's what you're doing in the campaign that matters. And besides, you can make this more difficult for you. You are risking something. You lose a battle with Arbol, GG, well played, more or less. Or that's kind of the intent of this campaign. So I highly recommend this campaign. Not necessarily the first campaign I would jump into, and I would recommend having some DLC, but it's one thing to have to own a race pack for a game, like Ogres, or own another game for the Empire or High Elves. It's a completely different matter if you can have a perfectly playable campaign by default, and you just benefit from having DLCs. That is one of the benefits, I would say, with Arbol as well. Costine signing out, stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and I'll see you next time. If you have any things that you would like me to cover, please let me know.